Pcgt National Youth Parliament 2020. Among us, we have Mr. V.P. Raja, Trustee of Pcgt and the speaker for today's session, Dr. Srimati Nutan P. Madiwal, Principal of Praveen Gandhi College of Law, Mumbai, Professor Kavita Sharma, Faculty Coordinator of Praveen Gandhi College of Law, Mumbai, the Executive Board members of all committees, and the Organizing Committee for Pcgt National Youth Parliament 2020. Pcgt National Youth Parliament 2020 is in association with Praveen Gandhi College of Law, Mumbai. Public Concern for Governance Trust is a registered trust founded in 2002 by Mr. Julio Ribeiro, Dr. R.K. Anand, and late Mr. B.G. Deshmukh to increase public participation and activism towards creating a more transparent and efficient government system. In order to sensitize and mentor the youth in ethical values with emphasis on good governance, in 2012, one of our trusts that in order to inculcate the value of good governance, it must first be practiced by the youth of this country. It was this idea that gave rise to Pcgt National Youth Parliament. Pcgt National Youth Parliament 2020 presents to you 6 different committees with varied agendas, all based on our value of good governance. Pcgt National Youth Parliament 2020 is in association with Praveen Gandhi College of Law, Mumbai. Our speaker for today, Mr. V.P. Raja sir, after obtaining 2 postgraduate degrees in physics from Delhi University and Columbia University respectively, he joined the Indian Administrative Services in 1974. While in service, he completed a MA in Rural Development Planning from the University of East Anglia, UK. So further obtained a Master's in Philosophy and Social Sciences from the Indian Institute of Public Administration, New Delhi. As an IS officer from the Maharashtra Cadre, Sir has worked in various assignments at the district, state, and center. In recognition to his outstanding contributions to administrative reforms, while working as a collector of Satara and as Transport Commissioner Maharashtra, he is awarded the Distinguished Government Administration Award. With the government of India, Sir worked at the Ministry of Atomic Energy. He retired as the Principal Advisor to the Department of Atomic Energy in September 2008. Thereafter, he was the Chairman of the Maharashtra Electricity Regulatory Commission for a period of 5 years till he attained the age of 65. Concurrently, Sir was also Chairman of the Expert Appraisal Committee of the Ministry of Environment and Forests of the Government of India for appraising of new projects for coal mining and thermal power projects from the point of view of their environmental impacts. Raja Sir continues to be actively involved in various issues of the energy sector. He has a passion for teaching, coaching, and mentoring young students. He is a visiting faculty both at the Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies, University of Mumbai, and at the BSc of the Bombay Stock Exchange, teaching courses centered on statistics, business reach, research, and quantitative methods and economics. We thank you, sir, for taking out your time and addressing the parliamentarians today. Before we proceed, I would request all of you to rename yourselves to your portfolio and committee allotment in the following manner: portfolio_committee. Also, we would be having a question and answer session towards the end of Sir's session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for your very kind words of introduction. I'd like to welcome all of you. And notice as of now, there are 123 participants. Some more may be joining in. We welcome all of you, and we are looking forward to a very successful edition, online edition of the National Youth Parliament on 1st and 2nd of August. All of you already know the subjects. That is, the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly is going to discuss the agrarian distress in Maharashtra with a special emphasis on the model of loan waivers. The Rajya Sabha is going to discuss the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 and what is happening on the ground on that. The Lok Sabha is going to discuss the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958. The AIPPM, the school committee, is going to review India's various environmental laws, and the joint session of Parliament is going to discuss the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2019. I like to give some general tips on how you research a subject and how you will think like a parliamentarian. I notice, Jairam Ramesh, Dayanadi Maran. So people have already been allocated certain names and political parties. So first, about the subject. The subject which you are going to discuss, the first step is to research it very well. Of course, some very elementary study guides have already been distributed to all of you, so that you're expected to read and understand. But you need to do your research a little more than the study guides themselves. Thanks to Google and internet search facilities available, I noticed out of the 5 committees, 4 are actually dealing with laws. IBC, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, Environmental Laws, Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2019. So committees which are dealing with a legislation, either the working of a legislation or a bill which is pending in Parliament, the first thing to do is to study that act and bill thoroughly. I'll give you a simple kind of method of how one studies laws. But before I come to that, you need to understand the big picture. The big picture is India is a functioning democracy. And all the institutions of this country, the institutions of democracy, which includes the parliament, the state legislatures, the executive, the judiciary, all of these are creations of the Indian Constitution. So even a parliament is an institution created by the Constitution. The Constitution is above all. The Union Cabinet is an institution created by the Constitution. The executive is an institution created by the Constitution. The entire intention of a democracy is, of course, societies have aspirations in every generation, and to achieve those aspirations, certain goals need to be set, certain objectives need to be achieved in a timeline. But while achieving those goals and objectives, the means employed are equally important. And the means is what is provided by the so-called framework of law, or what we broadly call as the rule of law. And what is this framework of law in India? It's a hierarchy, and on top of this hierarchy, in terms of paramountcy, the most paramount is the Constitution of India. And Part 3 of the Constitution deals with the Bill of Rights, or what the Indian Constitution calls as fundamental rights, starting from Article 12 to Article 35. are the fundamental rights, part 3 of the Constitution. So the Constitution is the mother of all laws, which provides the framework of how we are to function. And we must remember that the Parliament itself, or the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly, is a creation of the Constitution. Now, one of the fundamental rights is Article 13 of the Constitution, 1.3. I'm going to read out 13.1. Laws inconsistent with or in derogation of the fundamental rights. All laws in force in the territory of India immediately before the commencement of this Constitution, insofar as inconsistent with the provisions of this part means part 3, dealing with fundamental rights, shall, to the extent of such inconsistency, be void. And Article 13, Article 2 says, the state shall not make any law which takes away or abridges the rights conferred by this part, and any law made in contravention of this clause shall, to the extent of the contravention, be void. So this is the first restriction which has been put both on Parliament and on the state legislatures. The Parliament and the state legislatures do not have the power to enact any law which takes away or abridges the rights conferred by Part 3 of the Constitution of India. So the Indian Constitution, Part 3 of the Constitution, Article 13.2. All laws must be within that. So when you read all these 4 laws or bills, as you read them, you must ask your mind, or even jot down whenever you have a doubt, is there any provision here which directly or indirectly violates, takes away, or abridges any of the fundamental rights? So which means for you to study a law, you need to be quite thorough on the fundamental rights listed down in Part 3 of the Constitution of India. So every law has to be, and if something is not in agreement with that, and it still passes through Parliament on a petition or even tomorrow, it can be squashed and declared as ultra vires of the Constitution by the Supreme Court of India under Article 32 of the Constitution, Article 32 itself is a fundamental right, or by the High Courts under Article 226 of the Constitution of India. So Constitution, Part 3, Article 13, in particular 13.2. That's where all laws have to fall, including the 4 laws you're going to discuss. 3 of them are already laws on the statute books, and the 4th one is a bill pending in Parliament. Laws basically are of 2 kinds: procedural laws and substantive laws. Procedural laws in India are very few. It's the Civil Procedure Code, the Criminal Procedure Code, but you can consider the Evidence Act both as a procedural law or as a substantive law. It's a procedural law because only what is permissible under the Evidence Act can be admitted as evidence in a court. It can also be called as a substantive law on evidence. So at best, CPC, CRPC, Evidence Act, that's one set. All the substantive laws are on every subject, there is a law. On every subject, there is a law. Like the substantive law for crime is the Indian Penal Code. Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is a substantive law dealing with how to deal with insolvency and bankruptcy when it happens in organizations. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958 is again a substantive law giving some protection to the armed forces when they work in certain regions and when the region is notified under this act. Environmental laws. There are many environmental laws, but the principal law today in India is the Environmental Protection Act 1986, is the substantive law on environment. Then there are air pollution control laws and water pollution control laws and the environmental impact assessment notifications, everything under the Environmental Protection Act 1986. The Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code is a bill currently pending in Parliament, which has already been referred to Standing Committee, and the report of the Standing Committee has been placed in Parliament. That is where the matter stands. So all these are substantive laws within this overall hierarchy that you're going to be discussing in your respective committee. I said the first thing to do is to study these laws. Luckily, all these laws will be available if you just do a Google search. Read the BEAR Act. While reading the Act, please keep in mind, you must read the preamble of the Act a number of times. Because the preamble is the kernel, is the sanctum sanctorium of that particular Act. Why that Act? The summary of summaries is contained in the preamble. Everything that follows is to give effect to the preamble. So the preamble should be studied very, very carefully. Normally, when bills are introduced in Parliament or the state legislature, I should not use the word normally, invariably, mandatorily, whenever a bill is introduced in Parliament, either the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha or the state legislatures, it is necessarily accompanied by two documents. One is called the Statement of Objects and Reasons. The Statement of Objects and Reasons. And second is called the Financial Memorandum. You must read them. The entire idea is, just like all of us, members of Parliament are not necessarily lawyers who know everything inside out. They are general people who have a good intelligence. So there should be a method by which they should understand why this bill is before Parliament. So the Statement of Objects and Reasons, as the word suggests, gives a statement of why this bill. Normally, bills will have the Statement of Objects and Reasons. The moment the bill is passed by both the houses of the legislature or a Parliament and receives the assent of the President or the Governor, as the case may be, and is published, it becomes an act. And the moment it is notified as an act, in government publications, the act will not contain the Statement of Objects and Reasons. But in private publications, you will get them. So in respect of these 4 acts which you're considering, 3 of them are already acts. Environmental Protection Act, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So if you go into the government publication of the BEAR Act under Google search, you will not find the Statement of Objects and Reasons. But you can do a separate Google search, Statement of Objects of Reasons of these acts. Private publications will have it because the Statement of Objects and Reasons is meant to assist the honorable members of Parliament or the members of the Legislative Assembly or Legislative Council. But it's a very important document. You can also quickly read through the Financial Memorandum. As the word says, Financial Memorandum is, if we enact this law, what will be the recurring, very broadly, it's a rule of thumb, not exact calculations, what is the likely non-recurring expenditure that will come on the public exchequer, and what will be the broad recurring expenditure that will come on the public expenditure. For example, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code means you have to create those posts of judges. and some support staff to help them. So all that involves expenditure. So non-recurring expenditure when you first set up that office, and recurring expenditure. A broad rule of thumb idea of what is the expenditure involved is what will be contained in the statement of objects and reasons. So I repeat, read the preamble a number of times. You must understand every word in the preamble. Every word in the preamble is normally pregnant with meaning. Read the statement of objects and reasons a number of times. And after reading these two, go to the contents page. You're not started going into the main sections. Go to the contents page. See how the contents are divided into how many parts. For the Constitution, we use the word article. For Acts, we use the word sections. So you see, okay, now totally 157 sections are here. That is divided into 7 parts. See the subheading of each of the parts. Then see section 1 to 10 is part 1. 11 to 17 is part 2. Get a broad hang of the number of parts in which the contents is divided. And then read again in the contents page, the contents. With some experience, actually, when you read the contents page, you should be able to identify, I'm now making a very important point, every act will have some sections which can be called as charging sections. That is the vital, as I said, just as the preamble wants, the vital things, what the act wants to achieve is in the charging sections. So if you can identify the charging sections, and charging sections will not be too many. It may be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It won't be too many. It will be in single digits. Often 5, 6 maximum. To give a general example, not from the acts which you're going to read, but so that you understand the concept. Suppose it's a taxation law. There will be a charging section imposing the tax. That is levying the tax. There will be a charging section to see how to calculate the tax. What is the formula for calculating the tax? There will be a charging section for recovery of the tax. There will be a charging section if somebody doesn't pay, how to enforce it. These are charging sections. Or take the Motor Vehicles Act. The charging sections in the Motor Vehicles Act are, you need a driving license. You can't sit either on a 2-wheeler or a 4-wheeler unless you have a driving license. So necessity for driving license is a charging section. You can't take out a car or a 2-wheeler unless it is registered. So necessity for registration is a charging section. You can't take out a 2-wheeler or car unless minimum third-party insurance has been taken. That's a charging section. If you're driving a taxi, in addition to all this, you also need what is called a public service vehicle or authorization, which is not required for you and me, because we don't drive taxis or auto rickshaws or trucks, but they require. So these are charging sections. So similarly, in the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, Environmental Protection Act 1986, and this Occupational Health and Working Conditions Code 2019, please identify the charging sections. And all other sections in the Act are basically mechanical sections. That is, actually deal with a little more detail on how to give effect to the charging sections. So this simple trick of studying a legislation is very important. At least I found it very useful, because I used to work in administration where we used to get transferred every 2-3 years. And the moment you get transferred, you have a whole set of new laws to deal with. And you don't get too much time. At least within the first week or so, you should not only become familiar, but familiar enough. So this is the way you do it. You identify the charging sections. Or another way of putting it is, you're looking at a tree. The tree has a trunk. It has a number of branches. The branches has twigs. The twigs have leaves. Now, to understand the act is something like this. By just studying every section in an act is like a leaf or a small twig. You can't start memorizing those twigs and things. You should always be able to connect it to the branches and the trunk. The branches are the charging sections of the act. The trunk is actually Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, Article 13, because everything has to fit within that. So this is my advice to that. So first is study the acts, at least of the committee in which you're working. Luckily, I found by a stroke of accident that there is going to be a national quiz which you can give till 31st of this month on the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. The quiz is an online quiz. You can do the quiz in it's only a 10-minute quiz, but obviously, so at least the Rajya Sabha people who are going to discuss the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016, I will suggest over the next 1 week or so, or next 4 or 5 days, you study the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code thoroughly using the techniques which I have given, understand it fully, then read some articles, try to master it, and then before 31st July, do appear for this quiz. The first prize is 1 lakh of rupees. Second prize is 50,000 rupees. Suppose 20 people get 100% score. The person who completes this quiz in the shortest possible time, like somebody finished the quiz in 3 minutes, somebody else took 3 minutes 20 seconds. 3 minutes will be named as number 1, 3 minutes 20 seconds as number 2. That's the way they will do it. It has all been given, and Shivam must have circulated it to all the Rajya Sabha people. I have not seen any quiz like that for the other things. So I'm actually hoping that at least one of the Rajya Sabha delegates, besides the PCGT prizes, will also get a prize in this national quiz competition on the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Now coming to, so let me summarize. You must know the Constitution. If you don't know it too well, at least Part 3, the fundamental rights. You must know Article 13 of the Constitution, because nothing can go against Part 3 of the Constitution. The substantive law that you're dealing with, whether it is Insolvency, Bankruptcy Code, all this, find out what is the legislative power under which this law has been enacted. You know the 7th schedule to the Constitution, which has the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list. Try to identify the number in that list. That is the second restriction. A state legislature cannot enact laws on something which is not in the state list. So do those kinds of check. Now, it's not sufficient only to read the study material which we have, study guide which we have distributed, and the law. Do some study of history. Luckily, thanks to Google search, you can do a Google, try to read, there will be a number of articles, but try to see if you get a good status article or something which has been written by newspapers which have good reputation, like The Guardian, The Telegraph, in India, The Hindu, the Indian Express, papers with good reputation. Read articles in them, because there will be so many articles you can't read of them, but read some good articles. It is good to know history. a little bit of history. What do I mean by history? Let me give you an example. Taking this AIPPM is going to review India's environmental laws. Environment was in nobody's radar when I was born. I was born in 1948. In the 1950s, nobody thought of environment. It was taken for granted. I remember when I was a young child, I used to stay in Delhi, and we used to sleep in the open. That is, we used to pull out these charpoys and in the open garden, put our beds and sleep on top of the charpoy. Because there was full safety, there was greenery all around. We did a little bit of treatment to ensure that mosquitoes are not around. And if mosquitoes are there, you use a mosquito net. Those were the times, 1950s. Environment was not a main issue. Environment became an issue when the city of London, which is the financial capital of the world, started having a strange problem, which in those days used to be called smog. In winter months, visibility will completely become very low. There'll be a kind of a dust, hazy dust settled everywhere. Those of you, Delhi has been having that problem for the last 5-6 years. And some of you, if you have visited Delhi, Bombay occasionally has it, not much, but Delhi has a serious issue. London used to have that. And since London was the financial capital of the world, it kind of everybody's attention came up. And in 1972, the first international conference on environment was held. Mrs. Indira Gandhi attended on behalf of India, conference organized by the United Nations. And that's when decisions were taken that every government, rather every state, must look into this, have some environmental control activities, etc. In spite of that, nothing much happened in India except some little paperwork. In India, environmental consciousness suddenly grew up after the Bhopal gas disaster. So people in this school committee, Review of Indian Environmental Laws, should quickly read up what was this Bhopal gas disaster, where a gas called methyl isocyanate kind of leaked from a plant in Bhopal, which was set up by Union Carbide, by a subsidiary of Union Carbide in India, to produce a pesticide called Sevin. An intermediate of that was this gas called methyl isocyanate that leaked, and thousands and thousands of people died. And some people are still suffering because of that. The Bhopal gas disaster. But it created awareness. That was 1983, if I remember correctly, perhaps 3rd December 1983. I'm telling from memory. That is when environmental consciousness came up. And in 1986, the Environmental Protection Act 1986 was passed by Parliament as one of the reactions to the Bhopal gas disaster. Before that, there was an air pollution control legislation and a water pollution control legislation, all on the back burner, not taken very seriously. But after the Bhopal disaster, India woke up, and the Environmental Protection Act 1986 was passed. And a number of notifications, processes were started using that, and environmental impact assessment notification was issued. Now recently it has again come into what you can call as controversy or debate, because the present government in India is trying to water down the environmental impact assessment notification. So a draft notification has been issued 2020 giving only 15 days time for suggestions and consultations. One day before this time was over, people went to court and court said, nothing doing, you have to give more time. So now 12th August, time has been given till 12th August for people to make the suggestions and objections, etc. Court has further directed that the notification should be translated into 22 Indian languages so that everybody can understand. I will send you some material because I also happen to be a member of a group of retired civil servants called the Constitutional Contact Group. And we have written a letter to the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Environment Minister expressing our deep concern of this shoddy fashion in which the Environmental Impact Assessment 2020 notification is trying to water down all requirements, perhaps to help crony capitalists in the name of development. So we have made a strong statement on that. I will pass on that statement. I may have already passed it on to Shivam, and I'll request him to pass it on further. I gave this as an example of history. So every legislation has a history. There is a history to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958. So each of these acts have a history. You also need to go into that history. I don't have time to go into the history of each of them in today's session, but perhaps over the next 1 week, whatever I find, I will pass it on to Shivam so that he can pass it on to the concerned committee which is involved in it. Now, having done this kind of study, history, law, second is, you're now representing a political party in the parliament. So you should know the views of your political party. Mr. Dayanidhi Maran belongs to the DMK. So Dayanidhi Maran must read quickly about the DMK. He must know what was this Dravidian movement which occurred in the 1930s in Tamil Nadu. What has been happening more recently, about 10 years ago in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, happened almost 80, 90 years ago in the southern states of Tamil Nadu, at that time the Madras Presidency. You must have a quick history. Luckily, all that you can get through Google search. You must know how the DMK developed. How before that there was a party called the DK party. How that split into two parties, DMK and Anna DMK. And how that split occurred. But both of them believe more or less on similar Dravidian things. So you must, the party to which you belong, you must at least have a quick idea of its history. You must also have its idea of its ideology. The Dravidian parties, for example, are atheists. That is why Jayalalitha, even though was born as a Brahmin, on death, her body was buried. It was not cremated. So there are interesting, not just tidbits, it has to do with the ideology of political parties. Now, but very broadly, ideologies of political parties, sometimes one has to see, because what is happening in India today is not based on ideology. It is based on sheer opportunism and corruption. But hopefully that's a passing phase. Otherwise, parties are based on ideologies. And ideology means as we grow up, we all form some kind of an idea of how society ought to be. Let me give a recent example which all of you have seen. On 24th of March 2020, this nationwide lockdown was introduced. The Prime Minister addressed the nation at 8 o'clock in the evening, and said, have a Lakshman Rekha, don't go out of your house. He said it will be only for 18 days. Rather, the war of Mahabharata was won in 18 days. We will win this war against Corona in 3 weeks, in 21 days. But we know that the number of cases are increasing even now. The lockdown was continued. People lost their jobs. If you can't go out, all economic activity came to a standstill. And all of you would have seen on TV channels the plight of migrants. Interstate movement is banned, no buses available, no trains available. People started walking. Even within Maharashtra, people were walking. Some died because they were sleeping on the railway line, thinking there are no trains. People were walking right up to Uttar Pradesh and all this. Now, this one way or the other would have impacted each one of you just looking at it. And you would have started asking questions. Is this right? Is this how society, I mean, what is the fault of that migrant? You and I, attending this Zoom session, we were lucky to be born in reasonably good home. By good homes, I mean financially okay homes. But did we choose our parents? No. Our accident of birth was such that we were luckier to have been born in a home with reasonably okay finances. But the migrant worker who was walking home, his or her accident of birth took place in a home which did not have that financial capability. So when you lost your job, the safest place is your own home. Even if it is poor, the village is better than the slum in Mumbai. That's why you started walking back home. So all this raises a question, how should society be? How ought society to be organized? There are many threads. These actually a continuum, but I'll describe the extreme position. One extreme position is the accident of birth ought to become irrelevant. Even if people are not born equal, in life they should become equal. They should be treated equal. They should get equal opportunities. The state should provide for the health and education so that certain minimum health, education, nutrition is provided by the state, so that later, by the time they go to high school and college, they have equal opportunities. And even a person born in a very, very poor home can also become an engineer, can join the IIT. Complete equality. And after that, from each man as per his abilities, and to each as per his needs, his or her needs. This kind of a view of society was developed by Karl Marx. And the political philosophy that follows is Marxism or communism. Today, there are political parties in India which believe in the communist philosophy in varying degrees. You have the Communist Party of India, Marxist, CPM. You have the Communist Party of India, CPI. In the state of West Bengal, there is another party called the Revolutionary Socialist Party of India. All these parties believe in elections. They contest elections, get elected as members of parliament. There are some parties on the left, they don't even believe in the constitution and the electoral process because they believe the electoral process anyway is completely fixed and jinxed. In India, they're called Nakshalites or the Maoists. So extreme left is Maoism, Naxalism. People who believe in electoral politics and yet left, that is the equality principles, is CPM and CPI. The extreme right is, this is all Darwin's law. I mean, at the end, life is a struggle, and the fittest should survive. And those who are not fit will get eliminated. Bad luck. Nothing can be done. There are people who believe totally in the Darwin's theory of evolution and say the state can't do much about it. The state should encourage the fit and the able people. An extreme look at of that side leads to capitalism. Like today in America, all the debate, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party believe in capitalism, but the Republicans are more capitalist than the Democrats. Obamacare was how to look after the health of people who can't afford it. While Trump will say, go to hell, let them do what they want, not my business. People who can make money, who show efficiency should be encouraged. So that's the extreme right. Extreme right, people who again believe in the Constitution, are called fascists. Hitler was a fascist because he believed in the supremacy of the Aryan race and eliminate everybody else. Mussolini was a fascist. So just as you have Maoists who don't believe in the Constitution, or you can have fascists who don't believe in the Constitution. But you come a little inside, they still believe in the market economy. Historically, parties like the Swatantra Party was created at the time of independence, after independence, by a very famous person called Rajaji. Then came the Janasangh, and the Janasangh transformed itself to what is today's BJP. So Janasangh, BJP, these are all parties to the right, just as the communists are parties to the left. The Congress historically has been a middle ground party. Neither too left nor too right. But after its formation, it finds itself a little more comfortable with the left people than with the right people. So they believe in socialism. Inko bhi kuch karna hai. They don't believe in communism. Jawaharlal Nehru didn't believe in communism. They believe in the middle ground. But over the years, they feel more comfortable to ally with, let us say, CPI, CPM, etc., rather than with the BJP. The point I'm trying to make is, at least the party to which you've been allotted for this youth parliament, you should at least make a quick reading of their history and their ideology. And I will suggest you at least read the latest election manifestos. That is because a good parliamentarian belonging to a political party is to debate a subject or a bill in front of him, keeping in mind the ideology of his party also. Then the last point. So now you have studied, you have researched the subject. I've given you various hints on how to research the subject. The more you research, the better you will be. You have researched the ideology of the political party to which you belong. You have researched at least the latest election manifesto, the manifesto of the last, let us say, Lok Sabha elections, or the last Maharashtra Legislative Assembly elections for those in the of the party to which you belong in this youth parliament. Now the last point is how you are going to debate the subject in the youth parliament. For that, there are debating skills. One of the documents which I have circulated to Shivam, and he would have circulated to all of you, is the debating rules for schools issued by the Oxford University. It's a 60-page document. Very simple. Why does the British Parliament function very well, relatively speaking? There's no hangama, subjects are discussed well. The reason is universities in Britain, the oldest being Oxford and Cambridge, have a history of debating for the last over 150, 200 years. And they do it very, very systematically. An excellent debate for you to see, which also I have sent to Shivam, is the debate, the motion of the House in the Oxford Union. These are all by Students' Union. The motion was, Britain owes reparations to its erstwhile colonies. And Shashi Tharoor was one of the speakers. And he spoke for the motion. That is, yes. And he was the 7th speaker. I have sent a YouTube on that. Some of you would have seen it. Otherwise, watch. It's an outstanding speech. Only 9 minutes duration. But watch it again and again, and you'll get a lot of tips. How to use humor, how to make your point. It so happened, about 4 or 5 months after Shashi Tharoor made this speech, and which had become very famous. So later, Tharoor wrote a book on the subject also, on what the British did in India during the rule. It so happened that during one of my flights, either from Bombay to Delhi or Delhi to Bombay, I was still in service. I think I was working in the as chairman MERC. I was sitting adjacent to him in the business class in the airline. I think it was one of the Air India flights, or Air India and Indian Airlines perhaps had been merged by that time. So I had a full 1 hour, 15 minutes chat with him, and I asked him about this, as to how he collected so many facts. And he told me that for that 9-minute speech at the Oxford Union, he had prepared for about 3.5 months, sitting in the Parliament library in New Delhi. He had made detailed notes. And so he said, even though the debate was only 9 minutes, I had done about 3.5 months of preparation. On an average, working for about 2 to 2.5 hours every day, sitting in the Parliament House library. This is what Shashi Tharoor told me when we were traveling together in one of these Delhi-Bombay or Bombay-Delhi flights. So I will advise that you read this booklet on how to debate. Watch Shashi Tharoor's debate. You can watch other debates also. So to summarize, 3 points. Know the Constitution. Part 3, the fundamental rights. Article 13, 13.1 and 13.2. Go to the act with which you are dealing. Read the preamble and understand it fully. Search out the statement of objects and reasons. Read that a number of times, at least 3 or 4 times. Peruse through the financial memorandum. You don't have to read it as many times. You just peruse through it, sufficient. Then go through the contents page, see the subheadings, see the number of sections and how they are divided into how many parts, 6 parts, 7 parts, 8 parts. See the headings of those parts. Spend a lot of time on the contents page and see, since you have read the preamble and the statement of objects and reasons, if you understood that well, you should be able to encircle the charging sections, which will be 4, 5, or 6. And please remember, all the other sections are only details on how to give effect to this charging section. This is the trick. Once you have done that, you research a few more times besides a study guide you read. Then decide in your mind, depending on the ideology of the party to which you belong. And the party to which you belong will also have some important people. If you belong to the BJP, your heroes are Veer Savarkar, the RSS people. If you're Dayanidhi Maran, the founder of the DK party, is your hero. If you belong to the Congress, Jawaharlal Nehru, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Sardar Patel are your heroes. Even though recently Sardar Patel, BJP is trying to usurp and put a statue. He's actually a congressman. So studying Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Abdul Kalam, Azad, Mahatma Gandhi, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, all these are Congress heroes. You can read a few of them, because in a good speech, you give one or two quotes, sometimes a Urdu couplet, sometimes just one line, two quotes. So again, through Google search, you can always see important quotes of Veer Savarkar, which you can use appropriately if you're a BJP person, or important quotes of Jawaharlal Nehru, or letters of Jawaharlal Nehru to his daughter. You'll get beautiful quotes of Jawaharlal Nehru. His Tryst with Destiny speech is a very famous speech. So a few such things you read, you jot it down also. Then you decide your debating strategy, and all this put together will make our 1st and 2nd August very, very memorable. Thank you very much. I can keep on speaking, but over the next week, whatever ideas that I get, or if during my search, if I find something, I will forward it to Shivam, and Shivam will forward it to the group, to the concerned group, so that you can benefit by it. Thank you very much. I can now take any questions.
Thank you, sir. If there are any questions, do put it up in the chat box or mail it to us on pcgtnyp@gmail.com. We will forward them to sir. Also, all technical doubts will be addressed by the executive board members during the rules of procedure session. Since we've reached towards the end of today's introductory session, I would like to extend a vote of thanks. On behalf of the organizing committee of PCGT National Youth Parliament 2020, which is in association with Praveen Gandhi College of Law, Mumbai, we thank you, Raja sir, for your valuable insights on how our participants can think and research like a parliamentarian. We believe that this will benefit our participants and help them during their research. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, parliamentarians, for attending the introductory session. Hope you all have gained a lot from today's session. You would now be assigned to the breakout rooms of your respective committees, wherein the executive board members would address you and would conduct with the rules of procedures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all, and all the very best. Thank you. I am now